But our Black Panther comrades were being targeted and assassinated.
Once Richard Nixon was elected president and was inaugurated in January of 1969, we were targeted bam, bam, bam by a very sophisticated, advanced counterintelligence program, at the same time by very crude and violent police.
This pattern of harassment is going on against the Black Panther Party across the country. On Friday, the Watts office of the Black Panther Party was bombed and demolished. Last week, the Des Moines office was bombed. They can't stop anything we're doing as a legitimate political organization. So they come in and shoot us and shoot tear gas in our office and drag people off to jail like they've lost their minds.
Clearly, the FBI had decided by the end of '69 the Black Panther Party was going to be wiped out. It took a little longer, but that was the approach.
The SDS National Office was located just a few blocks down Madison Street from the Panther Chicago office, and we worked very closely with them.
I got to know some of the members of the Black Panther Party, and particularly Fred Hampton.
Because we don't think that people that found...
He was a wonderful speaker, and every time he would speak in Chicago, there would be huge crowds, and he inspired people tremendously, and I believe that's why he had to be killed by the United States. They knew that he was one of those people who could be a leader on a very important, profound, and wide level, and they set out to kill him, and they did it. And it's been documented.
So we always say in the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary.
In Chicago today, 2 Black Panthers were killed as police raided a Panther stronghold.
Police arrived at Fred Hampton's West Side apartment at 4:45 this morning. They had a search warrant authorizing them to look for illegal weapons. The state's attorney's office says that Hampton and another man were killed in the 15-minute gun battle which followed.
The pigs murdered our Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton while he lay in bed. Their lives, their arguing to the people can't bear up to the evidence that we have that they murdered our Deputy Chairman in cold blood as he lay in his bed asleep.
The Panther Party organized tours of the apartment that they were in when they were murdered. And I went with a group of people from the SDS National Office, which is a couple of blocks away.
Don't touch nothing, don't move nothing, because we want to keep everything just the way it is.
It was a scene of carnage. It was a scene of war. You see this door ridden with bullets, not little bullet holes, but shattered.
The room where the first brother Mark Clark was murdered at.
You walk through a living room into the bedroom, and there's a mattress soaked in his blood, red blood down the floor.
Anyone who went through that apartment and examined the evidence that was remaining there could come to only one conclusion, and that is that Fred Hampton, 21 years old and a member of a militant, well-known militant group, was murdered in his bed, probably as he lay asleep.
This blatant act of legitimatized murder strips all credibility from law enforcement. In the context of other acts against militant blacks in recent months, it suggests an official policy of systematic repression.
We felt that the murder, Fred, required us to be more grave, more serious, more determined to raise the stakes and not just be the white people who wrung their hands when black people were being murdered.
It's 2.5 weeks since Fred Hampton was murdered by the pigs who own this city, and for people to be able to enjoy Christmas time in this country without remembering and without making a choice about the struggle that's going on in the world, without taking action about a blatant murder that takes place in the city against a revolutionary black leader, is an obscenity.
When Fred was killed, I felt that this was the true kind of exposure of state power. This was really the way America was. It was willing to kill and murder, not just thousands of miles away, but right on the west side of Chicago, if it felt its power slipping at all. The mood was a mood that kind of ricocheted between determination and despair. There was a real sense that things were going to get pretty bad, and that the killing of Fred was emblematic of things getting pretty bad, and that we none of us imagined that we were going to live through it. We all felt that we were kind of biting our lip and getting ready for a serious confrontation.
December 1969, the month that Fred Hampton was killed, was a moment of intense violence and despair in America. For many young people, the hope and idealism of the 60s died that month at the Altamont Speedway in California. A concert that was supposed to have been the West Coast version of Woodstock turned into a nightmare of bad drugs and violence. The concert fell apart when the Hells Angels killed a man in front of the stage as the Rolling Stones played. That same month, Charles Manson and his followers were a top news story. They too signaled the end of the 60s and were the ugliest possible expression of the zeitgeist. Acid-crazed hippies committing a string of random violent murders. And in the same month, Life magazine published these photographs taken while American soldiers massacred hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians in the village of My Lai. It was the first time that many Americans had seen such disturbing images of the war.
The Vietnam War had made us crazy. It was sort of a mass mania driven by the United States bombing of Vietnam, among other things, and it just fed on itself. And you know, when you feel that you have right on your side, you can do some horrific things.
We figured out how to use guns and how to use bombs. I mean, we taught ourselves, we trained ourselves how to do it. At the same time, the organization was unable to resolve the question of how militant, how far would we go. Some people felt, literally, that the bigger the mess we could make, the better. That is, that whatever it cost, whatever, destructive kinds of activity we could do against the U.S. government, the better.
At that point in our thinking, there were no innocent Americans, at least not among the white ones. They all played some part in the atrocities of Vietnam, if only the passive roles of ignorance, acquiescence, and acceptance of privilege. All guilty. All Americans were legitimate targets for attack. We wanted this country to taste a tiny bit of what it had been dishing out. Just like the passive Americans we derided, I acquiesced to this terrible, demented logic. Not only was I willing to take the risks and suffer the consequences, but more importantly, I was overwhelmed by hate. I cherished my hate as a badge of moral superiority.
The townhouse was part of a small autonomous group in New York City that was being led by Terry Robbins.
Terry, more than probably anyone else, represented the view that it was too late for any kind of reconciliation inside this country, and that the best that we could do was to bring about a catastrophic series of actions that would get the attention of the world.
The group that was led by Terry in that house on West 11th Street was building the bomb. They had decided to set off the bomb at a non-commissioned officer's dance at Fort Dix. The idea being that there are no innocent in this war of aggression.
What we wanted to do here was deliver the most horrific hit that the United States government had ever suffered on its territory. We wanted to light it up. Our slogan was "Bring the war home," and we really wanted to give the United States and the rest of the world a sense that this country was going to be completely unlivable if the United States continued in Vietnam, and that was the goal of this group.
I think what has to be stared at is that they brought themselves, they were not brought, they brought themselves to that point. To the point at which they were ready to be mass murderers. This is mass murder we're talking about. They came to this conclusion, which is the conclusion that was come to by all the great killers, whether Hitler or Stalin or Mao, that they have a grand project for the transformation and purification of the world. And in the face of that project, ordinary life is dispensable. They joined that tradition.
On March 6, 1970, as the Weatherman Group on West 11th Street put the final touches on the bomb, there was a short circuit in the wiring, and the device accidentally exploded.
An expensive townhouse in New York's Greenwich Village was destroyed by 3 explosions, which killed at least 3 people.
The police still only know a part of the story. What they still have to find out is a good deal more about the extent of the bomb plot and the extent to which the student protesters of the 60s have turned into more serious revolutionaries using far more lethal weapons.
One body was identified as that of SDS member Theodore Gold. The second dead man has not yet been identified. A third victim was identified as 28-year-old Diana Outen, a member of the SDS Weatherman faction. She was the daughter of one of the richest men in the small town of Dwight, Illinois.
When he heard the news of his daughter's death, James Outen, a local banker and former Republican member of the Illinois House, cut short a vacation in London and hurried home.
I've been asked how I would advise other parents, and I've answered that I have no advice at all. I wouldn't know how to advise myself. I'm looking for guidelines myself from somebody else.
I was in Denver. We had a collective there. I heard something on the radio. We were actually driving to the mountains to do target practice. I heard something on the radio about, and it was statically, about somebody Gold was killed in a explosion in New York City. Later, I got a call saying that it'd been our people. And I would say that that's the one point in my life where I was overwhelmed by the heaviness of it. That was a really difficult loss.
When the townhouse went up, it was at that point that the FBI knew
that it was in a battle, and that these were truly committed revolutionaries who planned on doing a lot more to achieve the violent